Growing up in suburban Westchester had always felt like a carefully edited picture: bright lawns, neat sidewalks, and the quiet hum of a life that promised order and safety. Yet inside our home, the air was often thick with unspoken rules and subtle biases that I did not fully understand until I was much older. My father, Richard Miller, worked long hours as a corporate attorney, and my mother, Helen, kept a strict household where appearances mattered more than emotions. I remember one afternoon, sitting at the kitchen table, my younger sister Emily carefully arranging her homework in neat stacks, while I had left mine scattered across the counter. "James, do you even care about your work?" my mother asked, her voice sharp but calm, as if it was just a statement, not a question. I lowered my eyes and murmured, "I am trying, Mom." She sighed, shaking her head, and then turned to Emily with a smile that lit up the room. "Emily, I can see you are so organized. I am proud of you." The praise, effortless and warm for her, cut through me in a way I did not yet have words for. Later, at family dinners, my father would discuss my sister's school projects, her achievements, her plans for college, while my own efforts seemed to dissolve into the background. "James, do not forget to check your grades tonight," my father said once, as if it were a chore rather than encouragement. "Yes, Dad," I replied quietly, knowing that any longer response might be seen as whining. My grandmother lived with us in those years, and she had a gentler way of noticing my efforts. "James, I see you practicing your violin," she whispered one evening as I fumbled through scales. Her eyes were soft, yet the moments were fleeting, quickly overshadowed by my mother's critiques or the subtle comparisons to Emily. These small instances built a quiet weight inside me, a sense that love and recognition were contingent upon perfection or visible achievement, and that even in my own family, I could be overlooked or dismissed without ceremony. On weekends, when other children played outside, I would often find myself wandering the quiet streets, my baseball glove in hand, listening to the laughter of kids who seemed to belong somewhere I could not reach. "Do not go too far, James," my mother would call, her tone flat but warning, as if distance could lead to trouble, yet never explaining why her caution was necessary for Emily. School invitations, birthday parties, little competitions where Emily's presence was highlighted and mine forgotten, all cemented an early understanding that family could show favoritism openly and that my place was quietly peripheral. And yet, through these years of subtle neglect, I learned to observe, to listen, to understand the unspoken undercurrents that flowed through every conversation, every glance, every measured word. I practiced patience and calm, learning that to survive emotionally in a home that loved selectively, one must hold internal boundaries, notice every slight, and store each fragment for later reckoning. As I grew older, I began to see patterns, how praise could be weaponized, how words could be given generously to one child and withheld from another, shaping self-esteem silently but surely. Those lessons, harsh as they were, shaped me into a man attuned to nuance, wary of deceit, and quietly resilient. That evening in Manhattan, watching Laura whisper to Klaus, I recognized a familiar rhythm, one I had studied in childhood: subtle manipulation, undercurrents of favor, the power of unspoken advantage. I realized then that understanding the past might be the key to navigating the present. And just as my eyes met Laura's with a calm that hid all the storm inside me, I knew that the unspoken truths of my childhood were about to guide the first steps of the reckoning that would unfold over the next weeks. The first time I realized that staying silent could be a weapon, not a weakness, came unexpectedly that Thursday evening. I had always reacted quickly to discomfort, speaking up or showing my frustration, but as Laura and Klaus continued their conversation in rapid German, I did something different. I sat perfectly still, my hands resting lightly on the edge of the table, and simply listened. My usual instincts to comment, to interject, even to question, were suppressed deliberately. The hum of the restaurant around us faded as I focused entirely on their words, catching nuances and inflections that revealed far more than the surface meaning. Laura smiled confidently, resting her hand on her stomach once again. "Er word alles verstehen," she whispered, assuming I did not comprehend. Klaus nodded. "Ja, word nix mehr ken, es word like sane." I lifted my glass slowly, letting my attention remain unwaveringly on them. a faint smile curving my lips but revealing nothing. At that moment, I felt an unusual clarity, a quiet surge of control, as if the balance had subtly shifted. This was my opportunity to see the entire dynamic clearly, to recognize who held influence and who assumed power. As dessert arrived, a subtle tension weaved into the air. The waitress set a plate of tiramisu before us, and Klaus's hand lingered near mine for a brief moment, as if testing boundaries he did not yet understand. "James, try a bite," Laura said, her tone deceptively sweet, almost playful. "Thank you," I replied, my voice calm and measured. I could feel the unspoken curiosity from Klaus, sensing perhaps that I was not entirely the naive, oblivious husband they had anticipated. After a few minutes, I asked casually, "So, Klaus, do you enjoy working with Laura on these projects?" My German pronunciation was flawless, every word deliberate. Klaus blinked rapidly, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. "Oh ja, very much," he stammered. Laura's smile faltered, a subtle tension replacing her confidence. "James, you speak German?" she asked, her voice slightly higher than usual. "Of course," I said, holding her gaze steadily. "I have for many years. It seems we have much to discuss, do we not?" The quiet control I exercised was unlike anything I had felt before, a tangible shift from observer to participant. As we continued the meal, my silence and measured questions drew their attention, revealing cracks in their composure. I noted every glance, every slight pause, every hesitation in speech. This was more than understanding. It was an awakening, a realization that the power of calm observation could illuminate truths hidden in plain sight. And as the evening progressed, I knew that a deeper revelation was waiting, something that would challenge the assumptions they had made and the story they thought I believed. Something significant was about to unfold, and the first hints were already emerging in the careful dance of words, gestures, and unspoken strategies unfolding across the table before me. As the evening progressed, I began to notice subtle shifts that made my chest tighten with unease. Laura's words, carefully chosen and delivered in German, carried a weight she thought I would never comprehend. She laughed lightly at certain points, and Klaus nodded in agreement, their shared understanding forming a web of deception right in front of me. "James, can you pass the bread?" Laura asked casually, but there was a flicker in her eyes, a silent calculation. I handed it over without comment, my fingers brushing against hers briefly, sensing the tension that neither of them realized I could feel. Each comment about projects, deadlines, and upcoming meetings revealed not only their professional ambitions, but also a manipulation of my trust and presence. "He will manage everything perfectly," Klaus said, glancing at Laura with that small, satisfied smile. Laura nodded, her hand instinctively brushing her stomach again, the motion almost rehearsed. I sat back slightly, letting the words settle, absorbing them without reaction. Normally, I would have questioned, argued, or at least shown some form of acknowledgement. Tonight, I kept my composure, allowing the silence to emphasize their overconfidence. "I hope you understand the plan completely," Laura whispered, leaning in, assuming I remained ignorant. My pulse was steady, my mind sharply alert. I smiled lightly, just enough to mask the storm of realization forming inside. The lies, the manipulation, the planning, everything was unraveling before me, and yet I remained a calm observer. The situation felt like a slow-motion unraveling, the weight of betrayal pressing into the room, nearly tangible. A flash of memory hit me. Small discrepancies in our shared calendars, sudden business trips she never mentioned. Phone calls abruptly ended when I approached. They were pieces of a larger puzzle I had only just begun to assemble. I caught Klaus's glance flicking toward me, a question unspoken, sensing perhaps the first hints of unease that he had not anticipated. "Everything is under control, James," Laura added, her tone light but strained. I nodded silently, and she misread my acquiescence as compliance. The tiramisu sat between us, untouched, as the conversation flowed, each word layered with intention, each smile carefully calibrated. I noticed the tiny details, the placement of their phones, the subtle hand gestures, the way they avoided direct eye contact when speaking certain truths. It became clear that their web of deceit was extensive, and my role, long assumed to be peripheral, was about to be pivotal. Every calculated phrase and shared glance now revealed the breadth of their scheme, and I felt the first pangs of shock ripple through me, not from surprise, but from recognition of the manipulation's full extent. The room seemed to hold its breath as I considered my next move, knowing that this carefully constructed illusion was fragile and about to collapse under the weight of its own deception. And in that suspended moment, I understood that everything was on the brink of falling apart. The days that followed felt strangely quiet, not because anything had improved, but because I had stopped pretending that everything was normal. After that dinner, I began reaching for answers in the most ordinary ways. The next morning, while Laura was at work, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee growing cold beside me and opened my laptop. I started with emails, months of them. I searched dates, names, meeting schedules, travel confirmations. At first, everything seemed innocent enough. Then patterns began to emerge. Conferences that never appeared on the company website. Weekend meetings scheduled in cities where no clients existed. Hotel reservations attached to business trips that had somehow doubled in cost. My hands remained steady as I copied everything into a folder. That afternoon, I called Laura. "How is your day going?" I asked. "Busy," she answered immediately. "I have meetings all afternoon." Her response was smooth, effortless. "Which client are you meeting?" I asked casually. There was a pause. Only 2 seconds. But I noticed it. "The Chicago account," she said. After we hung up, I checked the company calendar. The Chicago account manager was on vacation in Florida that week. I stared at the screen for a long time. Not because I was shocked anymore, because I was beginning to understand how large the deception really was. Over the next several days, I made more attempts to reach her. I sent messages. "Dinner tonight." No response for hours. "Can we talk?" Read but unanswered. One evening, I left a handwritten note on the kitchen counter. I kept it simple. "Laura, I miss us. I feel like something has changed. If there is a problem, I hope we can face it together. Love, James." The note remained exactly where I left it until the following morning. Folded. Untouched. No reply. No acknowledgement. Nothing. The silence hurt more than an argument would have. A week later, I called my sister Emily. We had become closer in recent years despite our difficult childhood. "You sound tired," she said after hearing my voice. I hesitated. "Have you ever felt like someone was rewriting reality right in front of you?" There was a long pause. "James, what is going on?" I almost told her everything. "Instead," I said, "I am trying to understand something." "Then stop asking people who are benefiting from the lie," she replied quietly. Her words stayed with me long after the call ended. That evening, I sent one final email to Laura. It was not accusatory. It was not angry. It simply asked for honesty. 27 years of marriage deserved at least that much. The response arrived 3 hours later. One sentence. "You are imagining problems that do not exist." I read it 5 times, then 10. The message felt rehearsed, sterile, almost as if someone else had helped write it. Over the next few days, more strange things happened. Mutual friends stopped returning calls. Invitations disappeared. Conversations became awkward and brief. It was as if a version of me had already been introduced to people, a version I had never met myself. Someone had been quietly shaping a narrative while I was still trying to save a relationship. By the end of that week, I found myself sitting alone on the back patio after sunset, staring at the empty chair across from me. The house felt larger than it ever had before. Not because it was empty, because I had never felt so emotionally alone inside it. And somewhere beyond that silence, I could feel a much darker truth waiting for me, one that was moving closer with every passing day. The following weekend became the lowest point of my life, not because of a single dramatic event, but because of the quiet accumulation of losses that finally became impossible to ignore. Laura was home less and less. When she was present, she moved through the house like a polite stranger renting a room. One Saturday morning, I found myself standing in the kitchen holding 2 coffee mugs out of habit. I stared at them for several seconds before putting one back into the cabinet. That simple motion hurt more than I wanted to admit. 27 years of routines had been reduced to muscle memory. Later that afternoon, I drove to the cemetery where my parents were buried. It was a cool October day, and the wind carried fallen leaves across the grass. I sat on a nearby bench and looked at the headstones. For a long time, I said nothing. Eventually, I found myself speaking aloud. I think I missed the signs, I said quietly. Or maybe I saw them and chose not to believe them. No answer came, of course. Just the sound of wind moving through the trees. Yet something about saying those words lifted a weight from my chest. For the first time, I stopped asking why this was happening and started asking what I needed to do next. That shift felt small, but it mattered. When I returned home that evening, Laura was getting ready to leave again. Business dinner? I asked. Yes, she replied without meeting my eyes. You have had a lot of those lately. She paused. That is how careers work, James. Normally, I would have apologized for asking. Normally, I would have accepted the explanation and carried the doubt alone. Instead, I simply nodded. I see. The conversation ended there, but something had changed. I was no longer seeking reassurance from someone who had stopped offering it. A few days later, I received a call from my sister Emily. You sound different, she said. Different how? Calmer, she answered. That worries me. I laughed softly for the first time in weeks. Maybe I am just tired. No, she said. I think you are finally seeing things clearly. After we hung up, I sat in my home office and looked around the room. Family photographs lined the shelves. Vacation souvenirs gathered dust. Framed memories filled the walls. For years I had viewed those objects as proof of a shared life. Now I saw something else. Memories were valuable, but they were not evidence of the present. They could not tell me who someone was today. That realization hurt, but it also brought clarity. The loneliness remained. The uncertainty remained. Yet beneath both emotions, something new had appeared. Awareness. The feeling was not empowering in the dramatic way movies portray it. It was quieter than that. More practical, like finally waking up after a long sleep. That night, I opened the folder on my computer containing every email, receipt, calendar entry, and note I had collected. I reviewed everything carefully. Not with anger, not with desperation, with purpose. And as I reached the bottom of one particular document, my eyes stopped on a detail I had overlooked before. A detail connected to a date that should have been impossible. For the first time in weeks, my heartbeat accelerated. Because what I had just found suggested that the story I thought I understood was only the surface of something much bigger. The discovery I made that night did not immediately solve anything, but it changed the direction of my life. Instead of spending every waking hour chasing explanations, I began focusing on something I had neglected for years, myself. The following Monday, I reopened a consulting business I had quietly closed after retirement. For decades, I had worked in international logistics, helping companies navigate complex overseas operations. I had built a reputation, earned respect, and solved problems that most people considered impossible. Somewhere along the way, I had allowed that identity to shrink until it barely existed outside old photographs and framed certificates. Now, sitting in my home office before sunrise, I started rebuilding it. My first client came unexpectedly. An old colleague named Robert called after nearly 6 years of silence. James, I heard you might be available again, he said. Depends on the project, I replied. European distribution issues. We are losing money every month. I smiled for the first time in days. Send me the details. 3 days later, we were working together. 2 weeks later, he referred another client. Then another. My calendar slowly began filling with meetings, video calls, and strategy sessions. For the first time in months, I was waking up with purpose instead of anxiety. One afternoon, while reviewing contracts, Laura walked into my office unexpectedly. You seem busy lately, she said. I am, I answered without looking up. She lingered near the doorway. I did not realize you were working again. Neither did I replied calmly. She stood there for several seconds, as if expecting a longer conversation. When none came, she quietly left. The exchange lasted less than a minute, but something important had shifted. I was no longer organizing my days around her attention, her explanations, or her approval. Meanwhile, the business continued growing. I hired a part-time assistant named Sarah, a sharp woman in her early 40s who kept everything organized. During one meeting, she laughed and said, "You know, most people your age are trying to slow down." Maybe I spent too much time standing still already, I replied. Well, whatever you are doing, it is working, she said. The numbers agreed. Within 2 months, I was earning more than I had expected during my entire retirement. More importantly, I felt like myself again. The loneliness had not disappeared completely. Some evenings the house still felt quiet. Some mornings, I still caught myself remembering the life I thought I had. But those memories no longer controlled me. They existed beside a growing sense of confidence that came from action. One Saturday morning, Emily stopped by with coffee and pastries. She looked around my office, now filled with client files and schedules. "You look different," she said. "You said that before." "No," she replied, smiling. "This time I mean it as a compliment." We both laughed. Then her expression became more serious. "Whatever happens next, you are going to be okay." I looked toward the window where autumn sunlight stretched across the yard. For the first time, I believed she was right. Later that evening, while organizing documents from a new client, I received a notification on my computer. It was connected to the same trail of information I had been quietly following for weeks. A new record had appeared. A record containing a name, a date, and a financial transfer that should never have existed. As I stared at the screen, I realized I was finally approaching the center of the story. And this time, the truth was coming toward me faster than I had imagined. Over the next several months, my life became almost unrecognizable. And the most surprising part was that the change had nothing to do with anyone else. It came from finally trusting my own judgment. My consulting business continued expanding beyond anything I had expected. What started as a few projects turned into contracts with companies across New York, Illinois, Texas, and even several European partners. Every morning I arrived at a small office space I had leased overlooking the Hudson River. The first thing visitors saw was a polished brass plaque mounted beside the door. James Miller, President, Miller Global Strategies. The title itself was not what mattered. It was what it represented. For years, I had allowed my identity to shrink into the background. Now it stood openly in front of me every day. One morning, Sarah handed me a folder before a client meeting. "Your schedule is completely booked for the next 6 weeks, she said. I have never seen anything like this. I smiled. Neither have I. During a conference call later that afternoon, a senior executive from a shipping company leaned forward and said, "James, I have worked with consultants for 20 years. You solved a problem in 3 days that nobody else could fix in 6 months. I thanked him politely, but after the call ended, I sat quietly in my office for a moment. Not because I needed praise, because I realized I finally believed in my own value again. The confidence was different from anything I had experienced earlier in life. It was not loud. It did not require attention. It came from competence. It came from keeping promises to myself. Even Emily noticed it during one of her visits. She walked through the office, studying the framed certifications on the wall and the maps covered with client routes. "You build all this from scratch again," she said. "No," I replied. "I built it once before. I just forgot who I was." She laughed softly. "Well, it looks like you remembered." Meanwhile, I stopped measuring my days by what was happening at home. I focused on work, health, and routines. I started walking 3 miles every morning before sunrise. I joined a local business association. I reconnected with old colleagues. One evening, while attending an industry awards dinner in Manhattan, a former client introduced me to a room full of executives by saying, "If James Miller cannot solve it, nobody can." The room laughed, but I noticed something important. For the first time in years, I did not feel invisible. I did not feel like an observer watching life happen around me. I was fully present in my own story. Later that night, after returning home, I placed my event badge on the kitchen counter. The badge carried my name, my company, and the word speaker beneath it. I stared at it for a moment. Such a simple object. Yet it symbolized everything I had rebuilt. As I stood there in the quiet house, my phone vibrated with a new notification. The same investigation trail I had been following had finally produced a complete report. I opened the file, scanned the first page, and immediately recognized the date. Suddenly, the distance between the life I had rebuilt and the truth I had been seeking disappeared. Because the document in front of me connected directly back to that evening in Manhattan, and for the first time, the past and present had finally collided. The moment arrived more quietly than I had anticipated, though the tension in the air was thick enough to feel on my skin. I walked into the lobby of the hospital where Laura had arranged the meeting, my briefcase in hand, my mind rehearsing every word I might say, every question I would pose. The receptionist looked up and smiled politely. "Mr. Miller, Dr. Schmidt will see you now." I nodded and followed the narrow corridor, the fluorescent lights flickering softly above me, echoing in the quiet hallways. As I approached the room, I could hear faint voices inside. Laura's voice, calm but measured, discussing something with a doctor. I paused outside the door for a moment, listening. "He will adjust everything to my plans," Laura was saying. "Are you sure this will not cause complications?" asked the doctor, concern audible in his tone. Laura laughed lightly, almost arrogantly. "Trust me, everything is under control." I exhaled slowly and opened the door, stepping into the room. Both of them looked up simultaneously. Laura's smile faltered, just a fraction, and the doctor offered a nod of greeting. "James," Laura said, her voice steady, attempting casual familiarity. "Good to see you." I smiled politely, my expression neutral, though every muscle in my body was poised. "I came to understand what has been going on," I said calmly. "I thought we could review things together." The room felt smaller suddenly, the air dense with anticipation. Dr. Schmidt shifted papers on the desk while Laura's hands hovered near a stack of forms, a subtle sign of unease. "Certainly," the doctor replied. "We can go over everything." I took a seat opposite them, letting the silence stretch just long enough to emphasize control. "Before we proceed," I said, my voice measured, "I want complete transparency. Every plan, every discussion, every decision made in the last few months." Laura's gaze flickered to the doctor, then back at me. "Of course," she said, attempting lightness. "I have nothing to hide." The doctor adjusted his glasses. "We can review the records." My hand rested on my briefcase where I had stored the evidence I had quietly collected over weeks. Emails, notes, confirmations, all meticulously organized. I did not open it yet. I wanted the tension to simmer, to let them feel the weight of my presence and the control I had claimed over the situation. Laura cleared her throat. "Is there something specific you are worried about?" I shook my head slowly. "No, I am only here to understand, not to accuse." The subtlety of my words seemed to unsettle her more than a direct confrontation ever could. Every glance, every careful smile, every tiny gesture was observed, noted, and filed in my mind. I realized in that moment that the power dynamic had shifted entirely. The years of doubt, the months of manipulation, the subtle betrayals, all of it was about to converge in this room. And yet, before I revealed what I had discovered, before any word of truth passed my lips, the air seemed to thicken further, as if the room itself knew what was coming. My eyes met Laura's, and I could see the hesitation, the flicker of uncertainty, the first cracks in the confidence she had maintained for so long. The silence held us in a suspended state, the tension vibrating like a wire stretched too tightly, and for a moment, I sensed that the revelation that would follow was inevitable, unavoidable, and utterly transformative. For several seconds, nobody spoke. The silence inside the office became so complete that I could hear the faint hum of the ventilation system above us. Then I opened my briefcase and removed a single document. I placed it on the desk between Laura and Dr. Schmidt. Neither reached for it immediately. "What is that?" Laura asked. Her voice remained calm, but there was a strain underneath it now. "A record," I replied. "One that answers several questions." Dr. Schmidt adjusted his glasses and carefully pulled the paper closer. His eyes moved across the page. Then he stopped. I noticed the exact moment his expression changed. "Where did you get this?" he asked quietly. "Directly from the source," I answered. Laura immediately leaned forward. "What is he talking about?" Dr. Schmidt looked at her, then back at me. "This document confirms the transfer request." Laura's face lost color. It happened so quickly that even she seemed unaware of it. "That cannot be right," she said. "I never approved." She stopped herself before finishing the sentence. I remained silent. Sometimes people reveal more when nobody interrupts them. Dr. Schmidt slowly placed the paper back on the desk. "Laura," he said carefully, "according to this file, the request was submitted months ago." "That is impossible," she replied. "There must be some mistake." I opened another folder. This time I removed 3 additional documents and arranged them neatly beside the first. "Then perhaps all 4 sources made the same mistake," I said. The room became even quieter. Laura stared at the pages without touching them. "James," she began, "you do not understand the full situation." "I understand enough," I replied. My voice never rose. "I understand timelines. I understand signatures. I understand financial authorizations. And I understand that several people assumed I would never bother looking." Dr. Schmidt shifted uncomfortably in his chair. I believe this meeting should pause until legal counsel reviews everything. Laura looked at him sharply. There is no reason for that. Actually, he said, there is. For the first time, I saw genuine uncertainty replace confidence. Not panic, not anger, uncertainty. The kind that appears when reality refuses to cooperate with a carefully constructed narrative. Laura turned toward me. Why are you doing this? She asked. I almost smiled at the question. Because facts matter, I answered. And because every decision eventually meets the truth. Neither of us looked away. Several long seconds passed. Then Dr. Schmidt quietly cleared his throat. Mr. Miller, there is something else you should know. He opened a separate file that had been sitting on his desk since I arrived. His hand hesitated briefly before sliding it toward me. I was instructed not to discuss this until today. I looked down at the folder. My name was printed across the front. Beneath it was a date I recognized immediately. A date connected to the very beginning of everything. Slowly, I opened the file. The first page contained information I had never seen before. Information that changed the entire meaning of every event that had brought us into that room. Laura closed her eyes the moment she saw what was written there. And in that instant, I realized the biggest secret had never been the one I came to uncover. After reviewing the documents in front of me, I placed them back carefully, ensuring every folder was aligned precisely on the desk. Laura and Dr. Schmidt exchanged a glance I could not read, their earlier confidence replaced with visible hesitation. James, Laura said finally, her voice low, I did not think you would find all of this. I leaned back slightly, keeping my expression calm, almost neutral. I do not find what I am not looking for, I replied. The air in the room felt charged, but there was no shouting, no dramatics, only the weight of truth settling into place. Dr. Schmidt cleared his throat. It seems there have been multiple oversights, none of which were disclosed until today. I nodded. Oversights, perhaps, but intentional or not, the consequences are the same. Laura looked at me, her fingers pressed together as she tried to mask her anxiety. You are not angry? She asked cautiously. I am not angry, I said. I am aware. And being aware gives me choices. Choices that will guide every step from here on. I stood up, moving around the desk, and carefully arranged the folders in a line, the physical act emphasizing the clarity I now held. I am establishing boundaries, I continued. Every action moving forward will be measured, transparent, and accounted for. This is no longer negotiable. Laura swallowed, her eyes darting toward Dr. Schmidt. James, we can fix this. I can explain. Explanation does not change the facts. I interrupted gently but firmly. I need honesty, not rationalizations. And from this point forward, any attempt to manipulate or obscure the truth will not be tolerated. The doctor nodded slowly, understanding that I had assumed full control of the situation, that the dynamic had shifted decisively. I understand, Laura said, her tone subdued. I see now that things are different. I nodded once, without a smile. They are, and I will be the one to determine how we proceed. She did not respond immediately. The room remained quiet except for the faint hum of the fluorescent lights. Each person in the room felt the tension, but I did not allow it to unbalance me. I was fully aware of the scope, the evidence, and the responsibility I carried, and that awareness gave me control. Yet, even as the folders rested on the desk and my words lingered, I knew that this was only the beginning. The truth had been revealed, the boundaries firmly established, but the full implications were still to unfold. Outside, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the room, signaling that more decisions, more revelations, and more reckonings were inevitably coming. And in that suspended moment, as Laura and Dr. Schmidt remained silent and careful, I felt the first real sense of calm in months, tempered by the understanding that the resolution had only just begun, and that the story, though partially revealed, was far from fully written. Now, months later, I wake up before sunrise and watch the first lights spill across the Hudson River, the city still quiet beneath the pink sky. Life has changed. I have rebuilt routines, reclaimed my work, and strengthened my sense of self. The house is calmer. The folders and documents that once carried weight now feel like tools, reminders of what vigilance and patience can achieve. I have learned that trust is precious and boundaries are necessary. and that allowing others to define your value will only erode your own. If you are listening and carrying burdens of betrayal, of disappointment, or of quiet manipulation, know that your life can shift too. You do not have to remain defined by the actions of others. You can protect your heart, your finances, your mind, and your choices. I want you to remember that every day offers a chance to reclaim your narrative, to honor your intuition, and to walk with quiet strength. I am James Miller, 67, and the lesson I wish to share with you is simple. Self-respect and awareness are the foundations of resilience. Sometimes, the universe, in its own quiet way, guides us to the clarity we need to act, to discern, and to embrace the life we are meant to lead. I place my grandfather's compass on the desk each morning, a small, polished brass circle that reminds me of direction, purpose, and the paths I choose. And as you journey through your own life, remember that even after the deepest shadows, the light will return. Keep your heart alert, your mind steady, and your spirit open. Look for the signs, trust your instincts, and do not let anyone dictate your worth. I am grateful you have shared this time with me, and I hope you feel less alone knowing that others have faced storms and survived. If this story resonates, share your thoughts in the comments, tell me where you are watching from, and subscribe to the channel for more stories that illuminate the human heart. In the next videos, you will meet people whose challenges are different, yet whose journeys echo the same lessons of resilience, clarity, and the courage to reclaim one's life. Stay with me and discover what strength, insight, and quiet triumphs await in the stories